A 77 Type pistol has exposed a major flaw in the Shandong aircraft carrier's capabilities. The aircraft carrier's pilots are carrying this outdated pistol, which they often don't load due to safety concerns. This raises the question, is it really a tool for self-defense, or just a psychological comfort? Regardless of whether the specific image is real or not, it highlights a bigger issue. China might be building aircraft carriers quickly, but their effectiveness is still uncertain. Even the self-defense firearms given to pilots are outdated and unreliable, like the 77 Type pistol, known for jamming, misfiring, and causing injuries. The Chinese Navy hasn't reached a military standard in every detail. The issue isn't just about using old models, it points to a lack of a comprehensive naval system. How bad is the 77 Type pistol? It's not just old, it's notoriously bad. It wasn't created by professional designers, but by a worker named Wang Jiageng. Wang worked at the Jinan Military District's maintenance workshop during his spare time. In 1977, with help from the manufacturer and the military, it was finalized as the 77 Type pistol for use by senior military officers. This might sound inspiring, but the problem lies in this. Military weapons aren't just about making noise. Military weapons need systematic engineering design, strict reliability tests, and constant improvements. Wang Jiageng, lacking formal firearm design training or expertise in materials and structural mechanics, managed to create a working gun, but not one that's safe to use. From the moment the 77 Type was created, it was doomed to be flawed. Before the 77 Type, the military had developed the 59 and 64 Type pistols. However, after limited production, the 59 Type was phased out, and mass production of the 64 Type didn't occur until the 1980s. So when the 77 Type was introduced, there was initial hope for a new domestic gun. But soon, it became clear that the design has significant issues. Since its inception, it has had major flaws. The slide could easily cut fingers when loading. The safety mechanism could pinch the user's hand, and many users reported that loading the gun was painful. These issues are not just inconvenient, they're dangerous, especially for high-value personnel like aircraft carrier pilots. The 77 Type pistol's tendency to misfire is not rare, it's a common problem. As a result, many users choose not to load it at all. In short, this gun is unreliable when it matters most. It can't even be safely drawn and fired in an emergency. The 77 Type pistol has a weak firing pin component, leading to numerous cases of failure. The most dangerous issue is that the firing pin can fly backward and hit the shooter in the face, clearly compromising safety. Any firearm with such a history of accidents should never be used in high-risk environments, let alone on an aircraft carrier. The so-called single-handed loading feature requires significant force from the index finger, often failing. The most dangerous aspect is that if the pilot forgets to load the gun after it's chambered and tries to load it again with one hand, it could misfire. The design lacks a locking function, meaning the chambering mechanism moves along with the slide during recoil, potentially injuring the shooter's finger. As a result, many military personnel simply tape the chambering mechanism shut. In addition to the finger pinning, misfiring, and firing pin malfunctions, the 77 Type has two often overlooked but equally deadly flaws. The magazine latch frequently loosens or falls off, and the recoil spring and guide rail design often causes the slide to get stuck after firing. After pulling the trigger once, a second shot may not fire at all. Combined, these issues mean the gun may fail to fire during use. This is a fatal flaw for a self-defense weapon. The difficulty in loading the gun, combined with the risk of injury, has led to some to use their shoe soles to chamber the pistol. This is absurd. An aircraft carrier pilot carrying a self-defense weapon needs to rely on the sole of their shoe to load it. This is not modern naval warfare. The design of the 77 Type's single-handed loading mechanism dates back to the early 20th century, inspired by the lignum pistol. In 1913, Polish designer Witold Czerluski developed a new handgun and sold the design to Swiss SIG, producing the SIG Czerluski pistol. In 1921, Czerluski sold the design to the German company Bergmann, where it was later refined into the lignum pistol by the famous gun designer Hugo Schmeisser. Reportedly, the 77 Type was modeled after the lignum design, simply because it was found in a warehouse and the idea of a single-handed loading mechanism was deemed interesting. However, this pistol quickly became infamous for its numerous issues, leading gun enthusiasts to jokingly say, "It's not suitable for self-defense, but it works well for a quick end." A gun criticized by regular users in such a way has no place in an aircraft carrier pilot's holster. This is a clear sign of lack of system integrity. Many people argue that the 77 Type is outdated and that later versions were improved. This is true. The 77 type was modified several times, but it's important to note that these modifications were still based on the original flawed design. The main changes involved different materials, adjustments in manufacturing processes, and fixing minor issues. However, the core design flaws remained. The single-handed loading mechanism still easily pinches fingers, the risk of misfiring persists, and the ergonomics are still poor. Why couldn't the design be fixed? Because it was inherently flawed. You can't expect an amateur worker's creation to be transformed into a professional military handgun with minor adjustments. Why not redesign it completely? Because that would no longer be considered an improvement. It would become a new gun. And a new gun means a new project, new testing, new production lines, and new training. This is also an issue of face. Admitting that the 77 type pistol is a failure would mean acknowledging that past decisions were flawed. Therefore, the only option is to stubbornly improve it, which is why it is still being issued to aircraft carrier pilots today. The Chinese military industry still cannot bring itself to admit the failure of the 77 type pistol. Why the 77 type should never be on an aircraft carrier? The purpose of an aircraft pilot's sidearm is simple: to prevent harm from wild animals or to avoid being captured by militias or patrols after landing. In such scenarios, the only requirement for a weapon is reliability. Aircraft carriers and fighter jets are high-risk platforms, and the greatest fear is additional risk. The 77 type is prone to misfires, and its chambering mechanism lacks a locking function. Bringing this gun into a cockpit, hangar, or onto the deck, if it misfires in a confined space, it would cause a significant problem, introducing a non-combat loss risk to the aircraft carrier system. Moreover, if a misfire occurs in the cockpit, should the pilot continue their mission or return to base? Pilots rarely need to use their sidearms, but that doesn't mean they should carry a poor quality one. The less often it's used, the more crucial it is that it works perfectly when needed. One shot, no misfires. In reality, China isn't lacking new guns. The problem is that new guns aren't being issued. This is the truly embarrassing issue. As early as 2016, pilots were already training with the QSZ-11, a modern military handgun with a reliable mechanism. The firing pin won't misfire, the slide doesn't jam, the magazine latch stays secure, and the ergonomics are practical. Pilots can safely chamber the gun and draw it when necessary. What does this show? It shows that the military itself knows the 77 type isn't up to the job. So why is the 77 type still appearing on the Shandong aircraft carrier? One possibility is that while new guns are used in training, the old guns are still being issued in actual deployment. This suggests a breakdown in logistics, procurement cycles, and distribution systems. Small equipment is delayed as much as possible. A typical example is the modern-level destroyers introduced from Russia around 2000. They still carry Russia-imported AK rifles. Over 20 years later, these ships still haven't been upgraded to domestically produced weapons. This shows the Navy's logistics system is indifferent to replacing small equipment. Destroyers, frigates, aircraft carriers, all are launched one after another, but weapons, personal gear, and life-saving equipment remain unchanged if they still work. The same issue applies to the aircraft carrier. The aircraft can land, the catapults work, the radar is upgraded, but the pilot's sidearm is still the 77 type. So they use what's available. It's not a funding issue, but a matter of priorities, standardization, and logistical inertia. This reflects a focus on appearance over substance. There's an emphasis on platforms, but not on supporting equipment. There's a focus on what looks good on camera, but a disregard for what works in combat. That's what makes the sight of the 77 type pistol on the Shandong aircraft carrier so glaring. Another theory is that the old footage of the 77 type pistol is being used as if it's new, which actually points to a bigger problem. It suggests that either the new equipment hasn't been rolled out, or they're too afraid to show it. If the propaganda can't keep up with the pace of modernization, then real system modernization is even further behind. Modern naval propaganda isn't just about showing off, it's about displaying combat readiness and institutional confidence. The fact that 2025's aircraft carrier propaganda still uses old footage of the 77 type pistol points to two things. The propaganda system itself doesn't understand what modern standards are, or it does understand but doesn't have the equivalent modern equipment to show off. So we shouldn't get bogged down in whether or not this is really a 77 type pistol. The key takeaway is, a modernized military system would never repeatedly feature infamous old guns on its aircraft carrier pilots. In fact, the pilot's sidearm, along with survival kits and ejection seats, maritime or behind enemy lines survival gear, locator beacons, search and rescue support, and prisoner of war prevention all form part of an integrated system. Whether this system is modernized determines whether a pilot can return safely and whether an aircraft carrier dares to send aircraft into high-risk airspace. The strategies of the US and Russian militaries are very clear. Layered protection. The personal handgun is the minimum self-defense equipment. While the critical firepower is placed in the ejection seat survival kit, the US has the GAU-5A survival rifle, while Russia includes the PPK-20 submachine gun in the kit. They don't require pilots to turn the tide themselves, but expect them to buy time for rescue, whether by holding off the enemy or hunting for food. During the 2019 India-Pakistan conflict, the Indian pilot who was shot down used a Glock 26 compact handgun. Russian pilots often carry the APS submachine gun with plenty of ammunition. The US and Russia treat pilot survival after ejection as a system layering defense. A reliable handgun on the pilot's belt, a long survival weapon in the seat, and high-frequency, long-range rescue exercises in the background. But the 77 type doesn't even pass the first layer of reliability. This isn't just a model issue, it's a generational gap in system layers. Furthermore, the footage from the Shandong aircraft carrier hardly shows anything about the pilot's survival chain. What's in the ejection seat survival kit? What are the specifications of the maritime survival gear? How integrated are the locator beacons, encrypted radios, night vision, and signaling systems? What's in the range and coordination level of the fleet's rescue helicopters in deep-sea operations? The lack of public information doesn't necessarily mean it's lacking, but when a military displays something as low-end as the 77 type pistol, it's hard to believe it suddenly excels in survival systems. This is the logic of deducing the system from the details. Why does this slow chambering issue keep recurring in the Chinese Communist Navy? This is actually a structural issue within the Chinese military. Small arms procurement is given a very low priority. Large projects are closely monitored with set checkpoints, but smaller equipment is often delayed as much as possible. Moreover, integrating small items is particularly difficult. There's no single department responsible for decisions like what should be included in a pilot survival kit. Some suggest that the Navy should publicly bid for automatic self-defense weapons for its personnel. Others argue that China isn't incapable of producing good firearms. Many of the products from northern industries meet advanced standards, and some weapons are even better than those from foreign manufacturers. So why can't they select a reliable weapon for pilots? The problem lies in politics. The weapons exported are often copies, but the military must use domestically designed products, as political correctness dictates. This is the root cause. In simple terms, China's military industry excels at building platforms, but struggles with developing the systems around them. The fact that the Shandong's pilots are still using outdated handguns magnifies this problem to the extreme. While the aircraft carriers can be built quickly with large investments, smaller details like the pilot survival equipment requires decades of Navy culture, standardization, training, and logistics to perfect. The real measure of an aircraft carrier's combat capability is the full system supporting the pilot, from takeoff to sea landing, from survival to rescue, from training to gear replacement. The 77 type pistol highlights that the Chinese Navy system has yet to mature in this area. The biggest risk to the Shandong aircraft carrier's modernization isn't the steel or the tonnage, it lies in whether it has true naval standard systems in place. Zero tolerance for low probability but deadly risks, a system for individual gear standardization, a strict rhythm for logistics and equipment replacement, a modernized approach to propaganda and imagery. The issues with the 77 type pistol show that this system is not yet established. The problem with the Shandong isn't whether it has an aircraft carrier, but whether it's treated as a true combat system. What would happen if such a pistol were actually used in battle? Imagine a scenario where a conflict erupts in the Taiwan Strait and the Shandong carrier dispatches its aircraft. A J-15 fighter jet is shot down, and the pilot parachutes into a mountainous area. The first thing the pilot does after landing is pull out his gun for self-defense. Here's what could happen. Pulling back the slide, the pilot cuts off his finger, bleeding. Hearing movement nearby, the pilot, in a panic, pulls the trigger, but nothing happens. He forgot to load the gun. He quickly racks the slide again, but his hand gets pinched in the mechanism. Finally, the gun is loaded, but when facing militia fire, the gun jams after 2 shots. Trying to change the magazine, the latch comes loose and the magazine falls to the ground. What happens to the pilot? He's either captured or killed in action. All of this could have been avoided if he had been given a reliable QSZ-11 pistol. He could have gained at least 30 more minutes of escape time, waiting for the rescue helicopter. A faulty weapon doesn't just cost the life of a pilot, it undermines the entire aircraft carrier's operational credibility. Will the commanders be willing to send aircraft into high-risk areas? Will pilots feel confident? These are directly related to whether a pilot can survive after landing. The presence of the 77 type pistol on board the aircraft carrier essentially tells pilots, your life isn't that valuable.